Good morning, everybody. In the name of ENY, and we want to welcome everybody to this webcast of LATAM Oil and Gas Outlook. We hope, of course, that everybody, you and your family, are doing well and staying safe. My name is Rodrigo Chua. I'm the LATAM North Energy Tax Leader, and today we have great presenters for this webcast. Let me introduce you quickly to the presenters. We will have Daniel Dasso, that it is LATAM South Oil and Gas Tax Leader. We have also from Brazil, Marcio Oliveira, that he's an Energy Center Tax Leader and International Tax and Transaction and Service Partner. We will have also from Brazil, Mariano Manente, that it is basically partner of International Tax and Transaction Services, also based in Rio de Janeiro. From Peru, we have Beatriz de la Vega, that it is also partner of International Tax and Transaction Services, based in Lima. Also from Argentina, we have Pablo Barocio, that it is a senior manager in International Tax and Transaction Services, and it is based in London, a part of the LABC in London. We have from Mexico, Enrique Gonzalez, that it is the leader from LATAM North Transfer Pricing Leader. We have Paco Nogues, that it is a partner in International Tax and Transaction Services, also based in Houston, part of the LABC. And we have also Diego Gonzalez, that it is a labor law partner in Mexico City. And finally, we have from Colombia, Freddy Mora, that it is a partner in Business Tax Advisory based in Bogota. So we have an agenda that comprehends different topics. We will try to highlight different things that are occurring in our countries in particular. So we will discuss each country, and we will see the following topics. We will basically update you on an economic and political and social environment on each of the countries. We will see how the governments are reacting to the COVID and how they are reacting to the pandemic, and basically the application in particular for the industry. We have also, and very relevant, the key tax and transfer pricing considerations for the oil and gas industry. And finally, what is the expectation for the industry in each of the countries? So let's start. We will go through the different countries as mentioned. So let's start with Mexico. Paco.
Thanks for the introduction, Rodrigo. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I am Paco, and I will be today one of the presenters for Mexico. First of all, although we are living uncertain moments in which it is really hard to do an accurate prediction of the future of Mexican economy, the Ministry of Treasury released this April the preliminary guidelines of the general economic policy, which considers the impact that COVID and that the current oil price environment will have on the Mexican economy for 2020 and 2021. In this regard, the Ministry of Treasury foresees a negative growth of the GDP between a 3.9% and a 0.1%. which honestly we think that looks optimistic compared to the 6% estimation that has been made by the IMF. In fact, a higher contraction compared to the one in 2008 financial crisis is expected. Now, in regard to inflation, the outlook remains similar to prior estimates, which is between a 3% and 4% range. Finally, the Mexican peso has continued to depreciate against the US dollar, which has been up to a 31% compared to the exchange rate observed at the beginning of this year. Now, passing a little bit to the oil and gas industry. In regards to the oil price, the Mexican mix has decreased in more than an 80%, going down to an average price of 10%. However, this is in line to what has occurred globally. In terms of Pemex, Pemex is our national oil company, and that is considered to be a high top priority to our Mexican president. It continues to struggle financially. Recently, as you may already be aware, credit rating agencies such as Moody's and Fitch downgraded Pemex debt to junk. In this regard, Pemex continues to have a negative outlook in terms of its ability to repay its debt in the short and long term. This will definitely ramp up its financial costs and continue triggering unpaid bills to suppliers, such as oil field service companies. Although the government granted Pemex a $5 billion cash injection to repay some of its debt and granted a $2.8 billion tax incentive on its E&P tax regime, it is still uncertain the way in which Pemex will repay its debt. Just to give you some figures, Pemex has around $18 billion of debt that matures between 2020 and 2022, and around $75 billion of debt maturing in 2023 and onwards. So as you can see, this is a huge challenge for our national oil company. Given to this state, Pemex is now obligated to look for new sources of financing. Derived from this issue and as a result of the underdevelopment of many of their blocks, which were assigned in round zero, the National Hydrocarbon Commission, which is the CNH, foresees the reopening of Pemex farm-outs. However, in order for this to happen, they need to be also aligned with the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Treasury, and Pemex, which seems to be the major challenge given to the control that the government has on these government agencies. Next slide, please. Now I will jump to tell you more about what has been the reaction of Mexico against COVID. As part of the actions taken by the Mexican government to mitigate the effects of COVID-19, all non-essential activities were officially suspended until May 30. This topic will be explained more in detail by my colleague Diego, but I can anticipate that the Mexico's government has been criticized for the lack of guidance offered for what is considered to be an essential activity. Additionally, the Mexican government has also been criticized for their null response and support to the private sector given to the COVID-19. Contrary to other jurisdictions in which relevant tax incentive packages have been released, Mexico has been an exception. In turn, the government has continued to direct economic resources on the construction of public infrastructure, such as the Dos Bocas refinery that is located in Tabasco, the new Mexico City airport, and the Tren Maya railway project, which were, I would say, the three main projects announced by this new government and will continue to occur. Furthermore, recently, the government has requested their employees to reduce its salary, but non-layoffs are expected to be made. Regardless of the above, it is also important to mention some actions that the government will take from a tax standpoint. First, the promise of not creating new federal taxes remains. However, this issue does not exempt state governments of doing of putting new taxes, such as was the case of Baja California State, which recently announced the creation of state taxes for certain activities related to the downstream sector. So our recommendation here is to continue monitoring any developments on state governments. Second, it has been promised that the process of VAT refunds will be accelerated for taxpayers, which seems to be a very good news given to the lack of the government of refunding VAT favorable balances. Third, it is possible now to defer Social Security payments by requesting it to the tax authorities. And fourth, the deadline to file the annual tax return for individuals has been extended up to June. Unfortunately, this extension did not occur for Mexican legal entities. Next slide, please. Finally, as part of this slide, we will mention some key considerations from a tax, transfer pricing, and legal standpoint, which we consider to be critical under this current environment. Many of these issues may help you to generate time and cost efficiencies from a tax perspective. The first of them is a recommendation in order to look to do an entity rationalization exercise in order to simplify the corporate structure of your groups operating in Mexico. For example, and many of you are already aware, in Mexico, it is possible to do mergers on a tax-free manner. And in general terms, it is a very easygoing process in order to reduce the number of entities that groups have in Mexico. Additionally, the cost of maintaining Mexican dormant entities seems to be higher than the cost that implicates to wind up or to merge entities. Finally, and taking advantage of the current MLI environment, which as many of you know, that is the multilateral instrument, it is now a very good opportunity to start thinking in moving or migrating holding entities located in jurisdictions where there is no real substance and where the benefits of double tax treaties with Mexico may be denied. Then as a second recommendation, we are also recommending to monitor the impact of foreign exchange gain and losses triggered from account payables and receivables that are denominated in US dollars or foreign currencies. As you are aware, foreign exchange gain and losses on monetary assets are considered to be taxable items for corporate income tax purposes, which can trigger monthly and yearly income tax payments. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, the Mexican peso has depreciated against the US dollar in more than 30%. Third, we are also recommending to analyze the tax implications derived from the forgiveness or the lack of payments of accounts with non-Mexican residents, and this includes transactions with related or unrelated parties. Here, it is important to note that in certain cases, this forgiveness or lack of payment can result in a taxable income for corporate income tax purposes for the debtor, that in this case are Mexican entities, as well as in the obligation to submit the payment of withholding income taxes for Mexican source transactions. As Mexican source transactions, I mean any type of technical assistance, royalties, leases, or whatever other transactions defined by Title V of the Mexican income tax law. Finally, and I will just try to cover up to this, we are also transmitting to our network that, given to the current environment in which people have had to work from home and where it is really challenging to coordinate human resources efficiently, it might be a good opportunity to start analyzing the development of automation tools in order to comply with the multiple oil and gas tax and regulatory compliance obligations that Mexican legal entities has. For these purposes, our firm has already developed many tools in order to help our clients with this challenging situation. Now, I will pass the word to Enrique, which will talk about the actions the taxpayer may take from a transfer pricing perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Paco. Hello, good morning. I hope that everyone is safe. On the transfer pricing side, well, basically here, I think the relevant considerations is that these uncertain times clearly ask for a review of the intercompany transactions. What we're seeing right now is that most of the entities are facing difficult times. And because of that, they're actually doing renegotiations or changes to the transactions with unrelated parties. So clearly, these considerations establish a path forward for reviewing any related transaction compensation. What we're seeing right now is that companies are focused on two things. More importantly, the first one is to try to manage cash the best way possible by either reducing the amount of the intercompany transactions or even making some deferrals on certain payments or transactions, such as the payment of royalties or the payment, for example, of leasing transactions to avoid certain withholding charges. And clearly, the arguments are there for making a review. It is important to consider that most of the intercompany transactions have been established in intercompany agreements that do establish conditions for compensation, but that are established based on normal circumstances. So clearly, I think here the message is that it may be important to review these considerations right now to take a different position to what has been done in the past. On that regard, the information that is available from the comparables that are usually employed in transfer pricing analysis are not really readily available for some of the transactions, particularly the transactions that are based on company data. What we're seeing is that information for these companies is likely going to be available until the year end once the transfer pricing analysis is completed. But our suggestion, like Paco said, is perhaps to take a more proactive approach and trying to do the adjustments as in the moment in order to avoid considerations in the next months where it may be necessary to do a transfer pricing adjustment to modify the payments. Clearly, since the current considerations on intercompany transactions take normal conditions, the expectation is that such adjustment may be aimed to reduce or modify the value of the transactions. And those adjustments that may particularly modify taxable income by reducing it have a specific rules that need to be observed and complied with that are more complicated than transactions or adjustments that result in increasing of taxable income in the Mexican company. From the comparables perspective, what we're doing and what we are working with most of our clients is to review this information as it become available. What we're looking right now is analyzing the comparables that are normally used on transfer pricing analysis, not waiting for the final year of information, but rather analyzing the information that becomes available on a quarterly basis. Right now, as companies start to inform and present the results for the first quarter, some of the effect of the coronavirus in the results of the companies are being reflected. But we still believe that most, particularly for US comparables, the information is likely going to be impacted rarely in the second quarter, which should be presented somewhere around May, June, or July. So with that, clearly, it's important to consider changes to the intercompany agreements that reflect the current condition. So it's important to evaluate any considerations, particularly related to force majeure clauses. Clearly, some companies in Mexico are not performing activities at the moment because of the health contingency that was declared by the government. It is important that the cost and any type of expenses that are incurred on an extraordinary basis are determined and documented properly. And I think clearly that the most important thing here at the moment is that the transfer pricing model that has been employed may need to be reviewed, particularly the considerations around principal structures where based on the characterization of the principal companies, the question is really who should absorb the impact of this contingency so that the transfer pricing analysis is properly aligned and documented. From that perspective, I think that clearly in summary, our recommendation is take the proactive approach. I think it's better so that we can take advantage and clearly have a good documentation of the moment and trying to avoid late adjustment at the year end where it may be necessary to modify compensations that are currently happening. One of the things that are relevant is to try to be proactive here. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to Diego, who will talk about legal and labor considerations. Thank you.
Thanks, Enrique. And very quickly, to address these legal and labor topics. Just to keep in mind, nowadays the Mexican Congress is discussing a bill to on labor subcontracting that, if enacted, will reduce substantially the ability to have in place a service entity. So if we have a company with a dual operation, an operating company and a services company that houses employees, this bill, if enacted, will substantially limit that possibility. So it will be a key issue to consider during 2020. Can we jump to the next slide, please? With respect to COVID-19, the Mexican government issued a decree, in a nutshell, refers the essential activities that can continue operating. And this, as Paco mentioned, this catalog is very limited. And we are facing two problems: the supply chain that is not considered expressly in this decree, and also that we will face let's say a reactivation in the U.S. that and still be shutting down in Mexico. So that will be a very complex situation for companies. This decree refers that companies can continue operating, and most of the supply chain shall stop operations. The key issue is to determine if we are essential activities that can continue operating, and if in any case draft a defense file to be able to support or attend the inspection conducted by the Ministry of Employment to avoid penalties, closures, and also criminal charges. From a legal perspective, you should be aware as of the force majeure clauses in case a breach of contract is presented. So also you need to identify possible breach of contract from your vendors or clients. Rodrigo, that will be the highlights of the legal and labor aspects associated to COVID-19.
Okay, perfect. Let's then jump into Brazil. Just one comment. For all the participants, please feel free to ask any questions through the chat. We will try to answer it by the end of the webcast if we have time. Otherwise, we will answer the questions later. So, Mariano, Marcio, please start with Brazil.
Oh, hello guys. Here's Mariano speaking. Thank you very much for the time here. And I really hope that everybody is safe at home here. So we're gonna address a little bit on the Brazilian side. I'm gonna try to turn, between myself and Marcio here, to make this presentation. So similar to any country that is suffering with COVID, Brazil has, great challenges. From a practical perspective, we are seeing our local clients seeking funding alternatives, obtaining waivers to stop paying cost sharing and management fees. So this is quite very common here. And, they are trying as much as possible to obtain a relief on their balance sheets. Having said that, to the point that transfer pricing rules are quite rigid in Brazil, but it is allowed a pick and choose methodology, it is really important to take this moment and revisit on whether there should be a room to amend the methods. So for this next slide, if we can change the slide here for the next one. Thank you very much. I would like to pass to Marcio here, on whether he can expand a little bit on the exchange rate fluctuation. Marcio, it is up to you.
Hello, everybody. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And so we'll talk a little bit about the effects of exchange rate fluctuation for the transfer pricing in Brazil. So we think that the most of the multinational that operate in Brazil will not achieve the minimum markup in Brazil this year, because so those companies will have a lot of difficulty to pass the FX exchange rates effects to the customers. Consequently, the possibility to achieve a transfer price adjustment in 2020 is very high, especially for the company that apply the resale price method here. Why the Brazilian entities usually apply the resale price method? Because in Brazil, the taxpayer can choose the best method to prepare your transfer price documentation, different from the OECD. In the OECD, the taxpayer must choose the method that best fits for the transaction. In Brazil, no, it's not necessary. Because the taxpayer can choose the method that provide them the best savings. So consequently, the resale price method is applicable in Brazil and for many entities. And so when those entities will not achieve the minimum markup. However, we could have some solution to mitigate the effects of FX rates in Brazil for a transfer pricing perspective. Basically, the taxpayer can go ahead with a study to change the methodology, the method, and apply other methods for those transactions, especially the cost plus and cut. Okay, most of the taxpayers do not apply those methods because sometimes it's very difficult to document those transactions for many different reasons, and the resale price only requires the local information to be prepared. Okay, and so the first possibility is to change the transfer price method for those transactions. The second possibility is to request to the Brazilian tax authority, or Brazilian IRS, changing of the markup. We have this possibility in our legislation. Most of the taxpayers do not use this. In fact, it's not usual this kind of request to the tax authority. However, today we are living in a different moment. So we have the international crisis, and we believe that this possibility could be applicable in this case. Okay, prepare a formal request to the tax authority for changing the markup applicable to the resale price method. So those are the possibilities that you have to face the exchange rate fluctuation. In addition, we'll talk a little bit in the end of this presentation about this possibility to the loans agreement between intercompany transactions. Okay, so the next slide, please. Keep talking a little bit about transfer pricing too. So we have also an opportunity that can provide the cash to the Brazilian entities. Today, if we could resume the moment in one phrase, it could be the cash is the king. That's the fact. Considering that Brazil does not follow the OECD guideline, the Brazilian taxpayer can choose the transfer pricing method even to the past. Okay, so let's assume that in the past the taxpayer applied the resale price method for test one specific transaction. Okay, we have the possibility to come back to the past, evaluate this transaction again, and move to other methods, for instance, cost plus and cut. Okay, if the new method results in lower tax exposure, we have, in the end of the day, a tax credit that could be used to to offset other federal tax. So with it allows immediate compensation, okay, and it can relieve in the cash flow of those companies. So we believe that's a good opportunity for the taxpayer, and so and we applying this to many companies in Brazil, because so it's a way to save money and to reduce and to make better the cash flow of the companies in Brazil. Okay. So Mariano, so go ahead. Do you have other comments about the foreign tax credits and review intangibles and services?
Thanks, Marcio. As Marcio was saying, cash is the king here. Is king here, and this is now the hot topic in Brazil. As you may be aware, the Brazilian tax system, it is quite obtuse, but it is obtuse mostly because of the VAT system, a really complex system with tax over tax calculations. It is truly a mess. And the VAT are based on gross revenue and not on income. So even though the Brazilian government postponed the due date of certain indirect taxes due to the COVID, the VAT overall cost is the major issue in Brazil right now. However, regardless the complexity of the VAT system, at least Brazil facilitates a lot of offset of federal tax credits with federal tax debts. This is because there is an electronic statement in Brazil where the taxpayer just need to appoint the tax credits and do the offsetment. So this is an electronic system. It is straightforward. It is quite easy, to implement. But I think the issue here, it is not necessary to do the offsetment. It is pretty much, tax credits. What we are seeing with our clients right now is that there is plenty of room to improve the offsetment statement. Also, the tax credits control and governance, from what we are seeing, are not necessarily good. So if you need extra cash to get around of this situation, sometimes you just need to go back and check internally and just check on whether you are not missing to utilize the tax credit. So, just to finalize the slide here, we provide a couple of, let's say, alternatives on checking tax credits that most of our clients, they are not doing, checking any foreign tax credit available, checking, any missing offsetment statement that you could be able to utilize right now and you don't before, and reviewing any cross-border payment that you have been implementing right now or in the past to check on whether you pay or you have any type of overpayment of tax credits. So now I want to get back to you, Marcio, on the next slide for you to comment on the reviewing pricing policy.
Yes, Mariana. So as stated, so Brazil does not apply the OECD transfer pricing rules. So this gives a lot of flexibility to setting prices on the Brazilian side, as long as the taxpayer has the information that allows the application of other methods. Okay. So one possibility in Latin American countries, regional tax planning, is to try to relocate, make an analysis to relocate costs and expense between and among Latin American countries to reduce the tax burden in some countries. And we can use a combination of transfer pricing and VAT in customs positions in this direction. So it's specifically for goods, that's important to highlight, but also to services and intangibles. Specifically for intangibles and goods, we can also discuss some aspects related to the withholding. So I think that you, Mariana, can talk a little bit about those potential possibilities related not only withholding but all agreements to avoid the double taxation.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. When we are reviewing the transfer pricing policy, we may end up, facing to have changes on global supply chain, and because of that, certain trade agreements may be or not be applicable. But as I was saying in the beginning, VAT system in Brazil is complex. And what I would like to add here to this statement is that we do have as well a very obtuse VAT system on customs clearance on importation in Brazil. So any supply chain improvement that could lead to either new tax consequences or could even reduce the overall tax cost to be imposed. Thus, reviewing supply chain most general could help on the reduction on overall VAT tax cost. But don't precipitate any change on the supply without a proper VAT and global trade analysis. Unfortunately, due to the time, I was asked here maybe to resume our presentation, and we need to shift to the new country here. It is missing just one slide, but I think if I can just summarize this new slide, the only thing that I would like to add here as a second hot topic in Brazil is on the funding. So funding is key as well in Brazil. So our clients, they are reaching out to us to renegotiate and assistance on the tax perspective and transfer pricing on the renegotiation of the funding elements in Brazil. And the last comment that I would like to make here before resuming the presentation is that please remember that even though we are in this situation of COVID, there is something else that is happening in Brazil. The Brazilian currency depreciated in the last 2 months 15.5%. So the Brazilian assets, they are very cheap right now. And we are having a lot of discussions with global funds to make investments in Brazil on real estate and in other matters because of that. So there is an opportunity as well. If we can say that there is an opportunity right now on the COVID, it is pretty much on the acquisition of assets in Brazil. So then, and thank you very much for your time. I'm resuming the presentation, then get back to you guys.
So, Marcio, thanks, Mariano. Let's jump to Argentina. So I will let basically Daniel and Pablo to start the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Dasso, and I want to thank for having us to discuss about Argentina today. As a start, a few remarks regarding the current environment. First thing to say is that, as expected, Argentina has not been out at all of the very, very negative effects caused by the crisis. Moreover, the impact has been much harder given the difficult economic situation the country has been facing before the pandemic. And this is important because the starting point is completely different when comparing the countries within our region. Some figures may explain it. GDP decreased by 3% last year. Even when primary fiscal deficit was reduced, the level of inflation has been extremely high during the last period, being around 55% in 2019. And also, Argentina started facing the problem of their sovereign debt. As the country had recognized that it wouldn't be affordable in front of the upcoming payment schedule. So, within this context, a new government took office in December 10th, and why they were mainly dedicated on preventing the default of the debt as primary actions to recover the economy from recession, the pandemic came up, and this obliged, of course, to change all the priorities. It was installed a sort of debate regarding if it should prevail the public health or the economy, as if they were separate subjects. For this administration, there was no doubt, meaning that all the efforts were focused on preserving the health of populations, regardless of the bad impacts on the economy. In that sense, Argentina implemented a very strict and general lockdown from the beginning. For sure, there were essential activities excluded, some of them related to our industry. But the mandatory isolation has been extended a couple of times, and this is something expected to be repeated again, at least for the entire May. So what's the problem with that? What does it mean? Well, certainly this was not for free, because the turndown was aggravated more than ever in our country. As an indicator, energy consumption dropped to 50%, and there was a collapse in demand of everything, of course, as everywhere, but in particular of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel between 50% and 90% average. Forecasts indicate that GDP contraction could be between 6% and 10% for the whole year, and investments are planned to be reduced by 40%. I mean, in other words, pandemic pushed Argentina in a much weaker position than the one we already had, especially when the economy is still experiencing high inflation and the sovereign debt renegotiation is under uncertainty now, particularly after the aggressive plan proposed by the government some days ago. So the country risk jumped to 3,800 basic points. This is crazy, but real, putting Argentina completely out of the international financed market. And all of this is to stress that the only way Argentina may afford the crisis and the additional public expenses due to COVID-19 is just by printing money, which could also may fuel the risk of an even higher inflation rate during the year. Coming back to the pandemic, only after 30 days from lockdown started, the government finally decided to implement certain actions to help companies during these hard times and also to preserve the workforce. But anyway, something important to point out here. According to international guidelines, governments should focus on extending current due dates, deferring tax and social security payments, and accelerating the time of tax refunds. However, the behavior of Argentina in this regard was erratic and fairly not enough, as measures taken basically were not applicable to all players, but just to small business. And additionally, and contrary to this guide, some initiatives to create new taxes were raised at the federal and provincial levels, instead of looking for alternatives to alleviate the financial constraints companies are dealing with during these difficult times. So this is the picture. Having said that, Pablo now will provide us with some more details on COVID-19 environment, but more importantly, he will refer to general developments, the hot topics to watch out in 2020 onwards, because this will be the context waiting for us when the recovery takes place. So Pablo, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. In the next slide, we are going to talk about the measures that the government has adopted in response to COVID-19. But basically, as you have anticipated, the message of the government seems to be stay at home and continue paying taxes. Because if we divide in three groups, we say in the overview relevant to all taxpayers, the main measure is no deferral of tax payments or tax filings. Yes, there has been a suspension of tax procedural limits, that is for procedures in tax audits or litigations, so that the due dates would not be applicable within this time frame. And thirdly, there is a prohibition to dismiss or suspend employees. This could be seen mainly as a short-term policy measure to protect employment in some way. As regards the benefits, as Daniel said, that we are not following in Argentina the basic guidelines that other countries are following. And the benefits, we have to say, they are not very broad and they are restricted to some activities. In general terms, we may say that for oil and gas related activities, they may not be applicable. But just to provide you an idea of what we are talking about and that they are limited, we talk about some extensions for the payment of a certain portion of social security contributions, and also a program by which the government would be paying up to 50% of the salaries of employees with certain limits. The process so far to access these benefits has been somehow chaotic, and therefore the recommendation is to continue checking the guidelines, which are not many from the authorities, but also to monitor if the scope of the benefits may change and other activities may be introduced later on. As regards the third point, which is the creation of new taxes or the increase of existing taxes, there are announced projects and some of them can have direct impact on the oil and gas industry. At the federal level, we are talking about a new tax on personal wealth that will be discussed by the Congress. In principle, we should not expect impact here because it should be applicable only to individuals, to high net worth individuals, and not to corporate taxpayers. On the other hand, at the provincial level, and we are talking about the province of Neuquén, and just to clarify, Neuquén is the main province where the Vaca Muerta formation is located. This province has two proposals that are being discussed locally that can have direct impact. In particular, a 100% increase of the turnover tax rates. This is the provincial tax on gross sales for 2020. This could double the impact of turnover tax for businesses in this jurisdiction. And the other tax is the creation of a one-time tax on assets located in Neuquén. This will be at a 3% rate. And in this case, yes, it will be applicable to both individuals and companies that have assets in the jurisdiction. And this will be when a certain amount in Argentine pesos is exceeded, which is more or less equivalent to $1.5 million. Now, in the next slide, we wanted to present to you basically the hot topics or the developments that you should be taking into account for the 2020, irrespective of the COVID-19 measures or a specific environment. Here we start with changes in tax rates. Basically, we need to keep in mind that it was announced that the corporate income tax rate was going to decrease to 25% for this year, 2020, but finally it has been maintained in 30%, and then plus the applicable 7% dividend withholding tax. And the changes which are expected to be the reduction in the corporate income tax rates and the increase in the dividend withholding rate will take place only in 2021. In any case, the most important thing you need to take into account is the adjustment for inflation, which will be applicable for the following tax return filing. The other increase of a rate is for the net wealth tax from 0.25 to 0.5. This is applicable on the net equity value of Argentine companies, and it's already applicable for the last fiscal year. Another aspect that will severely impact or continues to be something to keep in mind is the foreign exchange rules applicable now, and you need to continue keeping in mind that prior authorization from the central bank will be required for payments between related parties. And there are two other tax developments that are also the ones that we see very applicable to companies in this industry, and are the rules around financing and the capital gains tax on indirect transfers. As regards financing, in the context of the foreign exchange regulations, TP regulations, and in particular, the introduction of a new rule to limit the deduction of expenses related to financing equal to 30% of EBITDA, replacing the old think-up rule that we had. The most important relevant thing you need to consider for this rule is that it's specifically applicable to the deduction of negative exchange differences that may arise from financial loans. And going to the capital gains tax on indirect transfers, here the movement we are seeing is basically both for internal group restructurings and also in the M&A space, and it's about how to calculate the tax or the conditions in order not to apply it, and also how to document those calculations and positions. Finally, just bringing to your attention that there's a new obligation to report final beneficiaries of Argentine companies that refers to the ultimate individuals that indirectly own Argentine companies, and the deadline will be in October this year. Having said this, Daniel, I think we will continue with some other comments for Argentina.
Okay, Pablo, just some final highlights. I will try to shorten the presentation and basically say that in terms of this particular situation Argentina is facing, currently is being discussed and surely will be implemented a minimum oil price, sort of support price for domestic transaction, something around $45 per barrel, which is much higher than the international price, so as to keep the activity alive and preserve employment. That's the main objective the government has. But in any case, this model should probably consider a fair distribution of the oil and gas income among all the parties involved, meaning producers of course, but also refiners, national and provincial governments, and consumers as well. This scheme, in fact, is not new at all. It has been adopted before in several times in Argentina and showing a lack of consistency in the sector policies. That's why Argentina requires a first and wider definition, which means to decide if international prices will determine local prices or other possible alternative, as I mentioned before. But in any case, the model has to be maintained to make the industry more predictable. That's the key issue, and that's why, and the situation that Argentina failed in the past. And finally, this crisis could create a new opportunity to revisit the tax system applicable to the industry. This is an old and pending matter that has been discussed for quite a long time, and now there could be some room for discussing it again. Some initiatives should be evaluated by the Congress, hopefully sooner than later. Among others, they include granting fiscal stability to the industry. Other ones are related to VAT procedures to get an early refund for this tax, the elimination of export duties, and some treatment favorable to the investment, particularly accelerated depreciation mechanisms and so on. So I know I was running a little bit, but I think it's time to move to our colleagues from Colombia.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Pablo. Let's start, Freddy, with Colombia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rodrigo. Good morning to everyone. Now we are going to talk about Colombia. To start with, there are two tables on the screen that shows the general economic indicators for the 19 year and how some of them has been so far. Couple of things to emphasize is that couple of things to emphasize is that unemployment rate is growing for the year. We already are in the 12.2. Exportation obviously are going down, mostly leaded for the oil and gas exportation reduction. And the economic growth rate that was expected to be 3.7 during the year has already been reviewed, and now is going set in 2 to 1.5. And finally, the depreciation of the Colombian peso against the US dollar was about 24% up to March. That will bring a lot of challenges to the companies due to the FX impact on the financials and taxes this year. To complement this environment, we started the year with a new tax reform, which in fact reduced the income tax rate for the year 2020 and 2021 and 22, which is a good measure. And some of the social unrest, embracing the Latin American movement that we saw in the beginning of the year, and mainly with great expectations for the oil and gas industry. Can we move to the next slide? Probably you just missed one. Okay. Let's talk about the COVID-15 measures. We are under a state of health emergency, which will go until May 30. There was a stage of social, economic, and ecological emergency since March 2017 to April 16. During that time, the president of Colombia issued 72 legislative decrees without the approval of Congress that help the government to manage the emergency. And among the actions taken is the lockdown that started on March 24 and which latest extension goes until May 11. Certain exemptions has been granted to the general lockdown, including the oil and gas businesses and activities, as we will comment further. Can we move to the next one, please? Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Um, I'm just roughly. Can we move to the next one, please? I'm just gonna roughly refer to the expectations. This information of the tables on the left hand side is taken from the survey that was run by the Colombian Petroleum Association (ACP), and I just want to highlight that the expectation of investment and the production for the year were very good and also the key factor for investments. But with COVID-19 effects and the oil price, those expectations are being a little bit harmed. And something to be taken into account is that according to official figures, we already have a reduced for March 11,000 barrels per day. This reduction and the expectations for the year end lead the stakeholders to think that probably royalties may decrease about 60 to 17% during the year. And a very negative measure is that the private companies in the oil and gas sector and the Ecopetrol, which is our NOC company, has announced already that the planned investment in exploration and production will be severely reduced for the year due to this COVID-19 and oil price crisis. And basically, I would like to give you the main concern that is that according to this study, the price break even for most of the companies in Colombia were something about the $40 per barrel. And with the prices that we already have seen, probably this will may force to the oil and gas producers to close some of the wells that has or the fields that already have a cost higher than the level of the prices, and this will of course impact all the stakeholders in the business as oil and gas services companies, and also reduce the amount of payments or royalties being paid. Okay, let's move to the next one, please. Now Colombia has taken several measures to help companies to navigate through these uncertain times. Regarding the operation measures, we would like to highlight that the Oil and Gas Agency has already announced the following: the possibility to ask for an extension to complete contractual commitments or transfer them among contracts with an extension that can be up to 12 months and with an option to add 6 more. Um, as it refers to the permanent process of assignment of areas, which is a process that allows to grant free areas to pre-qualified companies. Some of the stages of the current schedule have been moved forward to the late months of 2020. And finally, the Circular 13, which has created a lot of noise in between the oil and gas producers, because it implies that starting on May of this upcoming month, May, royalties should be paid on cash. In Colombia, most of the companies pay the royalties in kind, but the announce to change the conditions and the lack of the procedure on how to do that has caused a lot of uncertainty between the companies. We can move to the next one, please. This chart summarizes other the additional measures taken. Let's start with taxes. Extensions to file the fiscal year 19 income tax return has been moved until June, and also some other of the tax compliant obligation as the Annex 26, 2516 and magnetic means. The extension will imply that companies have to pay 2 installments of the income tax due for 2018. The first one on April and May, and the final one with the presentation. For VAT on medical equipment, VAT rate and custom tariffs has been eliminated. For the legal and administrative procedure side, the dates, terms, and state of limitations has been generally suspended while the state of emergency lasts. And finally, oil and gas activities has been authorized to be carried on to continue during the emergency. There are certain, the Ministry of Health issue a guidance on how these activities on the oil and gas sector has to be carried on. And this is a very important information for the companies to comply with these guidelines. And just to end up this part, from labor, employee, the pension contribution payments rate has been downgraded has been reduced from 16 to 3% just for the months of April and May, which is a good news for the companies, and this is something that may help them to reduce the cost. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? This is the main responses that we have seen from the companies. First of all, from the legal and labor plan standpoint, employees has been taking vacations, probably some non-remunerated licenses, and layoffs are inevitable for some companies. And this is something that this is the case that should be analyzed further and carefully, because the Colombian Ministry of Labor requires a specific authorization when layoffs exceed certain percentage of the total employees during a certain period of time. As we already said, wells and fields that does not meet the break-even point has been closed. And the companies are starting to applying for ANH relief benefits. And on the tax side, Colombia has already issued a procedure to kind of fast-track procedure to refund corporate income taxes and VAT balances in favor during the first 15 days, which is a good news for the companies, because in Colombia, a reform process may last like 5 to 6 months is as an average. The taxpayers are also looking for some tax planning regarding to the payment of the income tax installments for 2019, because two different options are allowed, and probably some of these options may imply that a higher value of the installments can be done, and therefore that would contribute to look and careful for the cash. And finally, our tax regime implies that when you are filing the 2019 income tax return, you have to pay an advance payment for the 2020 year. And also the tax rules grant the taxpayers to reduce this advance when the gross revenue of the companies have been reduced in a certain percentage during the first 6 months of the year. So that is something that, although the tax advance has to be paid, can be reduced in the future months, and will help the companies to take care of the cash. And now this is the probably the hot topics for the year. Last one, please. The hot topics for the year, and please be aware that our tax regime is based on monthly prepayment installments. So since January this year, we have already started to pay the tax due for 2020, and with the current situation, it may be expected that companies will overpay the tax for the year. Therefore, a balance in favor is going to be present for the 2020. And obviously, as the prices goes down, or as the oil and gas prices go down, there's going to be a limitation of some of the expenses that oil and gas companies already use as a tax planning, as the attribution expenses, which are tied up to a certain limit of the taxable income of the year. An additional thing to be mentioned is that since 2020, the UK and Colombia double taxation treaty is in force. That this treaty provides for the reduction of the income tax withholding of technical assistance, technical services, and consultancy when Colombia is paying from 20% to zero. And this is gonna be a good news for the companies, and also due to the most favorable clause included in some of the double taxation treaty, this benefit can also be extended to vendors in another jurisdictions. For Colombian income tax purposes and for 2020, it's worth to mention that the tax depreciation is allowed when the property, plant, and equipment is used. And as we are seeing some of the fields and wells are already stopped and closed, so this tax limitation will bring some challenges for the companies. And the tax amortization of the exploration cost goes under the UOP formula. So probably the deductions of the companies will be reduced this year. That brings us to the situation that good planning for the year, involving carry forwards and allowed deductions for the year, it's important to be taken into account. And if the case comes to a relinquishment of an E&P contract, it's very important to start to work on a defense file, just to be able to prove in future years when the tax authority audits come. With that, I'll pass the word to Beatriz in Peru to tell us about how Peru is going.
Thanks, Freddy. Let's go to the final country. Beatriz, please feel free to ask. We will be sharing the presentation with all the participants. Thank you for being with us, and we'll share it later on.
Good morning, everyone. Well, just to mention first all that in the case of Peru is not different than the other countries that already presented regarding the emergency measures that we were taking during the quarantine that was imposed in Peru, and it will last May 10. Well, some figures just to start the discussion, this short discussion regarding Peru, is that at the projection in terms of GDP for 2020 were of 3.8, the growth that we were expecting in 2020. However, now when this COVID-19 appeared, now we are talking about in terms of GDP that our growth will be around 2.4%. So, but the real figures will be better established or when we close this quarantine period. And another thing to say about Peru is that we are net importers, so we need our demand, internal demand is around 200,000 barrels per day, and our production at the end of 2019 was around 60,000 barrels per day. Unfortunately, now in the middle of the quarantine, the production is going down, and basically, in order to secure our own production, what is requested by the associations, the oil and gas association, is to permit delay payments on royalties and also some tax relief in order to face the economical situation that we are experiencing at this moment. There were some projects that were announced to be developed during this year, 2020. Unfortunately, we don't expect a material amount of investment, of course, for 2020. And there are other projects that still are under evaluation because in this context, the government will focus in the development of infrastructure. And saying that, there are 4 projects that are still under scrutiny currently. First of all, there is a pending tender of the distribution concession of natural gas for the north and center of Peru. There were already some investors that were approaching for the tender. The tender supposedly happened to be in September of last year, but now it will be postponed again because of the current situation. Second, still is pending to define how will be the tender regarding the southern natural gas pipeline. And this project was suspended 2 years ago, and what is happening now is that the government was evaluating what will be the model that will be applied. It means co-finance between the government and some private company that will decide to invest in that project. And the third project is the Northern Oil Pipeline. We have at north of Peru in the jungle some projects that feed the refinery that is located in the coast, the northern part, the coastal part of Peru. And what is pending is the modernization of that oil pipeline, but it will require that the Petroperu, our NOC, convoke to a potential tender in order to get in private investors. And the same regarding Block 192, which is currently under a service contract, but in September of this year, it needed to be transferred to the Petroperu, our NOC. But in order that the NOC could be the operator of that project, it will be necessary that the NOC convokes a tender in order to get a partner. But considering the situation, we expected that this project will be also postponed, maybe for the end of this year or for the beginning of the next one. Next, please. Talking about measures that the government took already regarding COVID-19, first of all, cash scheme, as Brazilian partners mentioned. So there were some measures already issued. One of them was to delay the payment of the income tax return 2019 until June, and also the monthly tax payments. Unfortunately, the delay of the monthly tax payments apply only for taxpayers that generate revenues up to approximately $6 million the last year, and it doesn't apply to the oil and gas producers in Peru. And the other is that, as I mentioned, that the producers, the oil and gas producers, are requesting delay payments in royalties, but that continue under evaluation. And there are other measures that were already issued, all related to tax obligations. For example, there was a reduction in the late interest rate on tax debts. There is a possibility to request refunds of some VAT credits, and of course in shorter term that normally occur. And on the other hand, the government allowed to paralyze suspension of deadlines in order to file claims. So we are in a sort of parenthesis at this moment. And also fines, the imposition of fines for tax and custom duties during the emergency period. Other measures that also were are in place is that the government issued a program called Reactiva Peru. It's a stimulus of $30 billion in order that medium-sized companies can request loans in order to continue to use as a working capital in order to continue moving the supply chain in Peru market. This program is already in place, and companies are approaching banks in order to get loans. And what is important is because the idea is to protect not only to the producer, but also to the providers or the industry. And also there are at this moment the possibility of delayed payments on electricity and natural gas bills. So this is important to mention because the power and utility sector have a reduction in demand of 30%. And it's important to mention because around 37% is energy generated by thermoelectric companies from natural gas. And so it's experiencing also a problem of liquidity and also reduction of revenues. And the other important thing in the head of individuals is the possibility to get refund of income tax, and also some requests of refund of some part of the pension fund that individuals are accumulated so far. Yesterday at night, we were informed that there was a bill of law that was pending to be approved, in which it was required that the individuals could withdraw from banks additional pension fund at the beginning around $4,000, but the government just approved that this withdrawal be around $1,000 for the months of April, May, and June. Next, please. And just last to mention that we are in a period in which the Congress delegate legislative faculties to the government, and this period is 45 days that start at the end of March, March 28, and it will last around May 11. And we are experiencing laws that are coming every day. For example, yesterday at night, there was published an extraordinary edition in which it was approved that companies can suspend the monthly income tax payments and comparing the revenues of 2020 against 2019. If the amount is less than 30% of the revenues that were generated in 2019, the companies will be entitled to require suspension of monthly payments of March, April, May, and June. And additional of that is that this delegation of faculties or to legislate include the possibility to promote extractive sectors, including in that mining as a fair industry in Peru, but also some measures related to oil and gas. And this is important because before this COVID-19 situation, we were already discussing the possibility to change our oil and gas law. So we will see if some of these measures could be discussed in this context. And there are other also important tax incentives that will be released soon. For example, the possibility to accelerate depreciation of some assets. We are expecting some tax regulations regarding that. And also the possibility to deduct donations that will be performed during this year without complying all the normally formal requirements that prohibit or reduce the possibility to do donations in Peru. And there are finally to say that there were before the COVID-19 a law that already authorized the government to implement control of mergers in Peru for all merger transactions in any kind of industry. For years, we only have that law for power and utility sector, but now it will be applicable for all industry. But because of the situation, the imposition of new regulations regarding that will be implemented in August, and we will see more news about that at the end of this year. So this is all that I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thanks, Beatriz, and of course to everybody. We are living, of course, challenging times, as you see, and we hope that all these highlights that we have been mentioning during the presentation is helpful for you and your business, and you to understand what is going on in each respective country. We will keep you updated because, of course, as you have seen, is there are a lot of things occurring and a lot of things that governments are releasing every day and modifying as these move forwards. So we will keep you posted of any new releases that will come out. We expect again that you and your families are safe and stay safe, and thank you for your time. Again, we will be sharing the presentation. Have a good day and the best for you.